I spent $52,000 on concrete just to watch her life fall apart. And honestly, it was worth every single dusty penny. She thought because she drove a white BMW X5 and ran the new HOA next door, she owned my land. She was about to learn that in Texas, the deed is king, and my family's deed went back to 1940. The whole mess started on a Tuesday, which is usually a quiet day on the Broken Spur Ranch. The sun was just burning the dew off the coastal grass, and I was out checking the fence line on the east pasture, the one that bordered the new development. They called it Sterling Creek Estates, which was a fancy name for a bunch of cookie-cutter McMansions crammed onto quarter-acre lots. For 50 years, that border had been nothing but 100 acres of quiet woods. Now, it was a war zone of construction noise and entitlement. My granddaddy, who bought these 50 acres with cash he'd saved his whole life, would have spit. My daddy, who'd passed the ranch to me, just shook his head every time he looked over there and said, "There goes the neighborhood." He wasn't wrong. I was on my old four-wheeler, my dog Blue trotting alongside, when I saw the cloud of dust. It was moving way too fast for a ranch road. Our main driveway is a half-mile of packed caliche that runs from the county road right up to the house. It's private, always has been. The deed says so. The survey map says so. The big weathered sign my dad put up 30 years ago that reads, "Private drive, no trespassing," says so. But this dust cloud was coming down it like it was the Daytona 500. It was a white blur, a luxury SUV of some kind, and it was heading straight for the gate to the pasture where I kept my pregnant heifers. I gunned the four-wheeler, cutting across the field to intercept. The engine whined in protest, but I had a bad feeling churning in my gut. Those heifers were the future of my herd. Calm, gentle Angus that spooked easy, especially when they were heavy with calf. The SUV didn't slow down. It skidded to a stop maybe 20 feet from the gate, horn blaring. Not a polite tap. A long, angry, sustained blast of noise that echoed across the pasture. Just like I feared, the herd scattered. A couple of the heifers, their bellies swollen and low, stumbled in the panic. One of them, my best one, a prize heifer I called Daisy, went down hard on her front knee. My blood ran cold. By the time I got there, the driver's side window of the BMW was gliding down. A woman with an expensive haircut, sunglasses the size of dinner plates, and a face pulled so tight it looked painful, leaned out. She had a phone clamped to her ear. "Yes, I'm here now," she said into it, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Just dealing with some local color." She took the phone from her ear and glared at me. "Can you move your cows? You're blocking the road." I killed the engine on the four-wheeler and took a slow breath, trying to tamp down the rage. I looked past her at Daisy, who was struggling to get back up. "Ma'am," I said, my voice tight. "First off, this ain't a road. This is my private driveway on my private ranch. Second, you just spooked a herd of pregnant cattle. You see that one that fell? If she loses that calf, it's a $15,000 loss." She actually scoffed. A real, honest-to-God, condescending scoff. "Don't be so dramatic. They're just animals. I'm Cynthia Bradshaw. I'm the president of the Sterling Creek Homeowners Association, and I have clients waiting. This road is the access point to the back acreage for our Phase 2 development. So if you don't mind," she waved a dismissive hand, adorned with a gaudy diamond ring. I swung my leg off the ATV and walked over to her window. I'm not a small man. Years of ranch work have put some size on me, and I made sure to stand where my shadow fell over her. "Let me be real clear, Mrs. Bradshaw," I said, keeping my voice low and even. This is not your access point. There is no Phase 2 access through my land. The only thing at the end of this drive is my house, my barn, and my family. You are trespassing. I suggest you turn this vehicle around and use the main entrance to your subdivision off the highway like everyone else." She took off her sunglasses, and I saw the fury in her eyes. It was the kind of fury that comes from someone who has never been told no in her life. "I don't think you understand," she hissed, her fake polite mask crumbling. "We have an easement. It was part of the land purchase. My lawyer has all the paperwork. Now move your livestock before I call the sheriff and have them cited for being a public nuisance." I almost laughed. A public nuisance on my own land. "You do that," I said, stepping back from her car. "You call the sheriff. I'm sure they'd be real interested to hear about you trespassing, driving recklessly, and endangering livestock. The dispatcher's name is Martha. Her daddy and my daddy used to hunt together. You tell her Jake McCoy sent you." I tipped my hat, a gesture that was anything but polite. "Have a nice day, ma'am." I turned my back on her and walked over to check on Daisy. The heifer was back on her feet, but she was favoring her front leg and breathing heavy. I ran a hand down her side, whispering to her, trying to calm her down. Behind me, I heard the squeal of tires as the BMW executed a furious three-point turn, spraying gravel all over the gate. The sound of her engine faded, a high-pitched whine of impotent rage. I stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle, a cold knot of dread in my stomach. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. That woman had the look of a cornered coyote, all teeth and desperation. And I had a feeling she was going to chew through anything, or anyone, to get what she wanted. My wife Sarah saw it on my face the second I walked in the house. She was a high school science teacher, smart and steady, the anchor that kept my world from spinning apart. She was at the kitchen counter grading papers, a cup of coffee steaming beside her. "Bad day with the new neighbors?" she asked, not even looking up. "You could say that," I grumbled, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. I told her the whole story. The BMW, the honking, the local color comment, the threat about an easement. When I got to the part about Daisy falling, she finally put her red pen down and gave me her full attention. "Is she okay, the calf?" "She's limping. I put her in the small corral by the barn to keep an eye on her. Too early to tell about the calf," I said, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. "The woman, this Cynthia Bradshaw, she's claiming she has an easement to cut through our driveway to get to the back of her subdivision." Sarah frowned. "That can't be right. Your dad was so meticulous about the property lines. He would have fought something like that tooth and nail." "That's what I told her. She said her lawyer has the paperwork." I ran a hand over my face. "I've got a copy of our deed and the last survey in the safe. I'll pull them out tonight. But Sarah, I got a real bad feeling about this one. She's not the type to just back down." "No," Sarah said, her voice turning firm. "She's the type you have to build a wall against." It was a figure of speech then. We had no idea how prophetic it would be. That night, after a long and stressful watch over Daisy, who thankfully seemed to be calming down, I went to the old iron safe in my office. I spun the combination, the clicks echoing in the quiet house. Inside, beneath stacks of cattle pedigrees and tax records, was a thick leather folio. It held every legal document pertaining to the Broken Spur Ranch, going all the way back to the original purchase in 1940. I spread the main deed and the 1985 survey map out on my desk. The paper was thick and slightly yellowed, the lines drawn with an engineer's precision. There it was, clear as day. Our 50 acres, a perfect rectangle. The county road to the west, the creek to the north, and the old woodland property to the east and south. Our half-mile driveway was marked with a solid line, designated Private Access Drive, ending in a cul-de-sac at our homestead. There were no other lines, no dotted indications of an easement, no right-of-way, no shared access mentioned anywhere in the legal description. It was ours. Period. The survey was signed, sealed, and filed with the county. It was ironclad. So, Cynthia Bradshaw was either mistaken or she was lying. Given the condescending attitude and the screeching tires, I was betting heavily on the latter. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a land grab, pure and simple. She'd bought that parcel next door, probably for a song, and was now trying to squeeze every last drop of profit out of it. An extra access point through our property would make her Phase 2 lots more valuable, easier to develop. She wasn't just building houses. She was selling a fantasy, and my ranch was apparently supposed to be a part of the scenery. The next morning, I took a drive into town. Not to the sheriff, not yet. I went to the county clerk's office, a dusty old building downtown that smelled of old paper and floor wax. I wanted to see the paperwork she was talking about. I wanted to see the deed for Sterling Creek Estates. A sweet older lady named Carol helped me pull the plat maps for the new development. I spent 2 hours hunched over a brightly lit table, comparing their brand new digitally rendered map to my old hand-drawn survey. Their property line butted right up against mine, just as it should. But then I saw it. A faint, dotted line superimposed over their map, cutting right across my driveway. It was labeled Proposed Future Access Easement. Proposed. Not existing, not deeded, not legal. Proposed. It was a wish, a fiction, a lie printed on a map to show to potential buyers. My anger, which had been simmering for 2 days, now had a focal point. She wasn't just a bully. She was a fraud. She was actively marketing her properties using a lie that directly involved my land. She was selling something she didn't own. And that, I knew, was a whole different level of trouble. It moved beyond a simple neighbor dispute and into the realm of deliberate deception. I made copies of their plat map, paid the fee, and had Carol stamp them with the date and time. Documentation. That was the first rule of any fight. Get your paperwork in order. When I got back to the ranch, I found the first casualty of the war. The heavy-duty chain and the master lock on the pasture gate, the one she'd screeched away from, were gone. Not picked, cut. A clean, sharp cut, right through a half-inch of hardened steel. Bolt cutters. She had come back with bolt cutters and destroyed my property. The gate was swinging free in the breeze. I felt a surge of white-hot rage that was almost dizzying. It was one thing to argue and make threats. It was another thing entirely to come onto my land and willfully destroy my property. This was a declaration. She was telling me that my locks and my signs meant nothing to her. I didn't just replace the lock. I drove the tractor down and parked it directly in front of the gate, lowering the front end loader so it was just inches from the bars. Then I went to the barn, grabbed the heaviest logging chain I owned, and wrapped it around the gate and the tractor's axle a dozen times, securing it with 2 new, even bigger locks. Let her try to cut through that. The next day, the phone rang. It was the sheriff's department. Not Martha, but a young deputy I didn't know. Mr. McCoy, we've received a complaint from a Mrs. Cynthia Bradshaw regarding an access issue and, animal cruelty? I swear I felt the blood drain from my face. Animal cruelty? You want to run that by me again, son? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Yes, sir. The complainant states that you're blocking a public easement with farm equipment and that your cattle are malnourished and being kept in unsafe conditions. I had to sit down. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. She had attacked my livelihood, my family's legacy, and now she was attacking my character, the very core of who I was as a rancher. My animals were my life. They got better care than most people. "Deputy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'd like to formally invite you to come out to my ranch. Right now. I'll show you my private, uneasemented driveway. I'll show you the bolt cutter marks on my gate. And then I'll introduce you to some of the best fed, best cared for Angus cattle in this entire state. You can bring Mrs. Bradshaw with you, if she's got the guts to show her face on my property again." An hour later, the deputy's cruiser pulled up. He was young, looked barely out of his 20s. He got out of the car looking uncomfortable. Cynthia Bradshaw was not with him. "Mr. McCoy," he said, adjusting his belt, "appreciate you being cooperative." "I've got nothing to hide," I said. I spent the next 30 minutes giving him the grand tour. I showed him the deed and the survey map from my office. I walked him down to the gate, showed him the cut chain I'd saved, the new chain, the tractor. Then I took him to the main pasture. The herd was grazing peacefully, sleek, black, and healthy under the afternoon sun. I pointed out Daisy in her private corral with fresh hay and a full trough of water. "That's the malnourished animal she was talking about," I said. "The one she nearly ran down with her car." The deputy took notes, his face grim. He looked at the cattle, at the endless green pasture, at the clean barn in the distance. "Sir, your operation looks immaculate," he said, finally. "I've seen a lot of ranches. This is one of the best. I'll be sure to note that in my report. As for the access dispute, that's a civil matter. But I've seen your survey. It looks pretty clear-cut. I'd advise her to stay off your property. If she comes back, you call us immediately." He left, and I felt a small flicker of victory. But it was short-lived. I knew this woman wouldn't be deterred by a single failed complaint. She was just testing the fences, looking for a weak spot. The false animal cruelty charge told me everything I needed to know about her character. There was no line she wouldn't cross. This wasn't about an easement anymore. This was about her trying to break me. The following week was a new kind of hell. It was a paper war. First came the certified letter from her lawyer. It was full of legal jargon, threats of lawsuits, and demands that I remove the illegal obstruction from the deeded community easement. It cited a clause from her development's founding documents, which of course meant nothing for my property. I passed it on to my own lawyer, a sharp old boy named Tom, who'd handled land disputes for 40 years. Tom just chuckled when he read it. "It's fluff, Jake," he said over the phone. "All hat, no cattle. She has no legal standing. But that doesn't mean she won't make your life miserable trying." He was right. 2 days later, a shiny new truck from the Environmental Protection Agency rolled down my driveway. A stern-looking woman in a blue polo shirt got out, clipboard in hand. "We've received an anonymous complaint," she announced, "about illegal dumping of hazardous materials and contaminated runoff into Sterling Creek." I just stared at her. Sterling Creek was on the far side of my property, pristine and clear. The only thing that ran into it was rainwater. The complaint was so absurd, so transparently malicious, that I couldn't even muster the anger. I just felt tired. "Ma'am," I said with a sigh, "let me guess. The complaint came from a resident of Sterling Creek Estates?" She had the grace to look a little embarrassed. "The source is anonymous." Right. I spent the next 2 hours walking her over every inch of my property. She took water samples from the creek, soil samples from the pasture, and inspected my fuel tanks and chemical storage shed, all of which were up to code and twice as clean as they needed to be. She was thorough, I'll give her that. And in the end, she found exactly what I knew she'd find. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. "Your ranch is a model of compliance, Mr. McCoy," she said as she was leaving. "I don't know who filed this complaint, but it's completely baseless. I'm sorry to have wasted your time." I watched her drive away, another official vehicle leaving my ranch after finding nothing wrong. It was harassment, plain and simple. She couldn't beat me on the facts of the land deed, so she was trying to bury me in a mountain of bureaucratic nonsense, hoping I'd get tired or get fined for some tiny, unrelated infraction, or just give up and give her what she wanted. Next, it was the health department. Another anonymous tip. This time about improper disposal of animal waste creating a biohazard. A different truck, a different clipboard, same result. The inspector practically apologized for being there after seeing my clean, well-maintained composting system far from any water source. Each visit was a disruption. It took hours out of my day, pulled me away from actual work that needed doing. It was a constant, low-grade stress. I started getting a knot in my stomach every time I saw an unfamiliar vehicle turn onto my drive. Sarah was worried. She saw the toll it was taking. "She's trying to wear you down, Jake," she said one night, rubbing my shoulders as I sat staring at a pile of paperwork. "Don't let her." "I'm not," I said, but I wasn't so sure. I was angry, but I was also weary. It felt like I was being pecked to death by a chicken. The final straw in this phase of the war came on a Friday evening. Sarah and I were sitting on the porch, trying to enjoy a quiet sunset, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a friend in town. "Dude, are you watching Channel 8? I frowned and went inside, flipping the TV to the local news. And there it was, a segment on their Community Watch program. The anchor was talking with a somber face about a dispute in the county. A classic case, she was saying, of old-world agriculture clashing with new community development. And then Cynthia Bradshaw filled the screen. She was a vision of concerned citizenship. Her hair was perfect, her expression troubled. She stood in front of the manicured entrance to Sterling Creek Estates, a picture of suburban serenity. "We just want to be good neighbors," she said, her voice trembling slightly for the camera. "We bought this land with the understanding that we had a secondary access point for emergency vehicles and future residents. It's on all our marketing materials. But our neighbor, Mr. McCoy, has taken it upon himself to illegally block it." The camera then panned to a shaky, zoomed-in shot of my tractor parked at the gate. It looked menacing, aggressive. "He's been incredibly hostile," Cynthia continued, dabbing at a dry eye. "He's created a dangerous situation. What if there's a fire and our residents are trapped? He's holding our safety hostage." The report then cut to a local resident, a man I'd never seen before, who was probably one of her first buyers. "We were told we'd have that access," he said, looking confused and angry. "It was part of the appeal of living out here, the quiet country road." My road. My driveway. They were calling it a quiet country road. I stood there, speechless, as the reporter wrapped up the segment by saying my name, and that I had refused to comment, which was a bald-faced lie, because no one had even tried to call me. They painted me as a stubborn, unreasonable redneck, a danger to the community, who was hoarding a public road out of pure spite. Sarah came and stood beside me, her hand finding mine. "That's it," she said, her voice cold as ice. "She's gone too far." I didn't say anything. I just stared at the screen, at the smug, false sincerity on Cynthia's face. The weariness I'd been feeling evaporated, burned away by a pure, clarifying rage. She had lied to the authorities. She had lied to the media. She was lying to her customers. She had brought the war to my doorstep, and now she was broadcasting it to the whole county. Fine. If it was a war she wanted, it was a war she was going to get. But we weren't going to fight it on her terms anymore. The paper war was over. It was time for something more concrete. The next morning, I was up before the sun, a thermos of black coffee in my hand and a fire in my belly. I went back to my office and pulled out the file on Cynthia's development again. I looked at her proposed future access easement lie on the map. She was selling a promise she couldn't keep, and that's when a new thought began to form. A seed of an idea that was as audacious as her own lies. What if I let her? What if I let her keep selling that lie? She was digging a hole for herself, contract by contract. Every house she sold with the promise of access through my land was another shovel full of dirt. The deeper the hole, the harder the fall. I just needed to make sure that when she finally hit the bottom, there was no way out. That's when the real turning point came, and it didn't come from a lawyer or a county clerk. It came from Eddie, our mailman. Eddie had been delivering mail on this route for 30 years. He knew everyone, saw everything, and had a healthy distrust for people who drove BMWs too fast on gravel roads. He pulled up that afternoon, his window rolled down. "Morning, Jake," he said, handing me a bundle of mail that included, I noted with grim satisfaction, another letter from Cynthia's lawyer. "Heard you're having some trouble with the Queen of Sterling Creek." "You could say that, Eddie," I replied, leaning against the mailbox. Eddie lowered his voice. He was a gossip, but a reliable one. "You know, it's funny," he started. "I deliver to her house. Gets a lot of mail from banks. A lot of it's got those windows, you know, the ones that say Final Notice on the inside." He paused for effect. "Heard tell she went through a real nasty divorce. Ex-husband was some big shot in Dallas, left her with a mountain of debt. This whole development thing, she's leveraged up to her eyeballs. She needs it to work. She needs to sell every last one of those lots, and fast." And then he delivered the final, critical piece of the puzzle. "I've seen the flyers she leaves for the realtors," he whispered, leaning closer. "She's not just promising access, Jake. She's advertising it as a private, scenic ranch road for residents' use. She's selling your driveway as a luxury amenity, like it's a community pool or a tennis court." That was it. That was the nail. It wasn't just a verbal promise or a dotted line on a map anymore. She was putting it in writing in her marketing materials. She was committing fraud, clear as day, and Eddie was the witness. I knew right then what I had to do. The defensive war was over. It was time to go on the offensive. This wasn't just about protecting my land anymore. This was about justice. "Thanks, Eddie," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. "You have no idea how much you just helped me." He just winked, put his truck in gear, and drove off, leaving me standing there with a handful of junk mail and a plan. A glorious, expensive, and beautifully petty plan. I went straight inside and called my lawyer, Tom. I told him everything. About the false reports, the news story, and what Eddie the mailman had just told me. "Fraudulent advertising," Tom said, a new excitement in his voice. "That's the ticket, Jake. If you can prove she's knowingly selling properties based on a material misrepresentation, that amenity she doesn't own, her sales contracts could be voidable. She could be on the hook for some serious damages, not to mention potential criminal charges." "So what do we do?" I asked. "For now, Nothing, he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. We let her keep doing it. We let her sell as many houses as she can. We let her dig that hole nice and deep. You just keep documenting everything. Get a new camera for that gate, a good one. Get video of her or her realtors bringing clients down your drive. Time-stamped video is our best friend. So I did. I went to the electronics store and bought 2 high-definition, motion-activated trail cams. I mounted one on a fence post, hidden by the leaves of an old oak tree, aimed directly at the gate. I put the other one further up the drive, covering the whole stretch of road. Within 48 hours, I had my first video. It was Cynthia Bradshaw herself, in her white BMW, pulling up to my tractor-blocked gate with a well-dressed couple in the back seat. She got out, pointed down my driveway toward my house, and I could see her talking animatedly, waving her hands as if describing the beautiful scenery they would soon be able to enjoy. The couple looked impressed. Then she gestured dismissively at the tractor, said something that made them laugh, and got back in her car. It was perfect. Over the next 3 weeks, I collected 17 more videos just like it. Her, or a perky young realtor in a branded polo shirt, giving tours of my driveway. While she was busy committing fraud on camera, the lawsuit she had threatened finally materialized. A process server showed up one afternoon and handed me a thick envelope. I was being sued in civil court for, quote, damages and injunctive relief to the tune of $100,000 for blocking the, quote, Sterling Creek Community Easement. I took it straight to Tom's office. He read through it, shaking his head. This is an act of pure desperation, Jake. It has no merit, and her lawyer knows it. She's trying to scare you into settling. She's hoping you don't have the money or the stomach to fight it in court. She's wrong, I said, my voice flat. I know, Tom said. This is actually good for us. The lawsuit opens up the discovery process. We can now legally subpoena her financial records, her marketing materials, her communications with buyers. She just handed us the shovel to dig up everything she's trying to hide. The fight was escalating, and so was the cost. Tom's retainer wasn't cheap. But every time I thought about the expense, I'd watch one of those videos of her smug face as she lied to another unsuspecting family, and the cost would feel irrelevant. This was about principle. My granddaddy didn't work his fingers to the bone to buy this land just so some desperate fraudster in a BMW could steal it a generation later. It was during this time, with the lawsuit filed and the cameras rolling, that I decided it was time to move on to the final phase of my plan. It was time to build the wall. I knew it was going to be expensive. I knew it was going to be a massive undertaking. But it was also going to be permanent. It was going to be the physical manifestation of the word no. A word Cynthia Bradshaw was about to learn the meaning of in steel-reinforced concrete. This is the point where I realized that this whole battle was no longer just a legal tiff or a neighborly dispute. It had become my primary project. And if you're enjoying the story of how a rancher decided to fight back against an entitled HOA president with a pocket full of fraudulent contracts, then go ahead and smash that like button. Subscribe if you want to see how this all plays out, because the best part, the part with the concrete trucks, is coming right up. This was my ranch, my rules, and I was about to make them legally and physically untouchable. I called a guy I knew named Big Mike. Mike was a contractor who specialized in agricultural and industrial construction. He was a huge man with a beard that looked like it had its own ecosystem and hands the size of cinder blocks. He mostly built barns, stockades, and commercial foundations. He also had a legendary hatred for HOAs and entitled city folks moving to the country and trying to change things. He was, in short, the perfect man for the job. I had him out to the ranch the next day. I showed him the property line, the driveway, and the spot where Cynthia Bradshaw thought her magical easement existed. "I want to build a wall, Mike," I said. "Not a fence, a wall. I want it to be tall, ugly, and permanent. I want it to be the last thing she sees when she thinks about my property." Mike spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust and grinned. "My kind of job," he rumbled. "What are we talking? Concrete? Steel?" "Yes," I said. We spent the next hour walking the line. It was about a 100-foot stretch that needed to be sealed off completely, from the edge of the pasture fence right up to where the thick woods started. "Here's the thing, Mike," I explained. "It can't just be a wall. It has to be legal. I don't want her to have any angle to come at me with." "No problem," he said, already making notes on a pad. "We won't file it as a spite fence or a boundary wall. We'll file the permit for an agricultural security barrier. It's for protecting livestock and high-value equipment from theft and unauthorized access. We'll say it's to prevent vehicular trespass that could endanger your prize cattle, which, from what you tell me, is the God's honest truth. An ASB has different requirements. We can go taller, thicker. Ain't a damn thing an HOA can do about it as long as it's 100% on your property." The plan he drew up was beautiful in its brutal simplicity. A 12-foot-high, steel-reinforced concrete wall. The foundation would be 4 feet deep. At the center would be a new gate, but not just any gate. This one would be a custom-built, solid steel plate gate, electronically operated, set on massive steel posts sunk 10 feet into the ground in concrete pylons. "Even a tank ain't getting through this, Jake," Mike had said with a proud smile. "And if she tries to ram it, she'll just turn her fancy German car into a tin can." The price tag was staggering. With materials, labor, permits, and the custom gate, the quote came to $52,000. I looked at the number and didn't even flinch. It was a lot of money. It was money I had earmarked for a new bull and some equipment upgrades. But this was more important. This was an investment in peace. An investment in proving a point so sharp she'd never forget it. "I'll pay in cash," I told him. Mike's eyes widened slightly. "All right then," he said. "We can start Monday." The timing was crucial. Through Eddie, I'd heard that Cynthia was planning a big Phase 2 open house weekend. She was bringing in a bunch of realtors from Dallas and Houston, catering the event, and was expecting to sign contracts on at least 5 new homes. Her entire financial future was riding on this weekend. The weekend my wall was scheduled to be completed. The Monday morning the work started was glorious. At precisely 6 a.m., the first of the heavy equipment rumbled down my driveway. A backhoe, a cement mixer, and a flatbed carrying rebar and forms. The noise was incredible. The ground shook. It was the symphony of my revenge. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee and watched the dawn break over the beautiful chaos. It took less than an hour for Cynthia to appear. Her white BMW came tearing down the county road and screeched to a halt at the edge of my property line, right where Mike's crew was setting up. She jumped out of the car, already shouting. She was wearing silk pajamas and a look of pure, unadulterated fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked at Big Mike, who was calmly directing the backhoe operator. Mike, bless his heart, turned to her slowly, took a long, deliberate look at her designer pajamas, and then said, "Ma'am, this is a construction site. You need to be wearing a hard hat and steel-toed boots to be here." "I will not. You stop this at once. You are on my easement. I will have you arrested for trespassing." I decided it was time for my entrance. I strolled down the driveway, my hands in my pockets. "Morning, Cynthia," I said cheerfully. "You're up early." Her head snapped toward me, her eyes blazing. You are behind this. I will sue you into oblivion. This is illegal." "Actually, it's not," I said, holding up a plastic-sheathed copy of the permit. "This is a fully permitted agricultural security barrier being built entirely on my property in accordance with all county regulations. It's for the protection of my livestock from vehicular threats." I gave her a pointed look. "We've had some issues with that lately." She snatched the permit from my hand, and her eyes scanned it frantically. I could see the moment the words agricultural security barrier registered. The legal loophole. The one thing her HOA rulebook and her cheap lawyer had no power over. Her face went from red to a sort of pale, blotchy white. "You can't do this," she whispered, the fight momentarily draining out of her. "It's already being done," I said, gesturing to the backhoe, which was now digging a massive trench along my property line. "You might want to move your car. It's in the way of the concrete truck." For the next 5 days, the construction was a constant source of drama and satisfaction. Cynthia was out there every morning, screaming at the crew. She called the sheriff's department at least 10 times. Each time, a deputy would come out, look at Mike's permit, look at my survey stakes that clearly marked my property line, and tell her there was nothing they could do. She tried to serve Mike's crew with a cease and desist letter from her lawyer. Mike used it to wipe some grease off his hands before tossing it into a trash barrel. By Wednesday, the forms were in and the rebar was laid. On Thursday, the concrete trucks arrived. A convoy of them, 5 in a row, rolling down my drive. The pouring of the wall was an epic event. The noise, the smell of wet concrete, the sight of that gray slurry filling the forms. It was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. Cynthia just stood there by the road, her arms crossed, watching her shortcut, her lie, being entombed in 12 feet of solid rock. The wall was finished by Friday afternoon. The forms were stripped away to reveal a brutalist masterpiece, a sheer, imposing, and undeniably permanent barrier. Big Mike's crew was installing the massive steel gate, welding the hinges into place. It was a work of art. This was the day before her big open house. I knew she was desperate. The videos from my trail cams showed a sharp drop-off in tours of my driveway once the construction started. Her sales pitch was literally being walled off before her eyes. That evening, as the sun was setting, it happened. I was in the barn, and I heard the sound of a car engine revving high and hard. I ran outside just in time to see it. Cynthia's white BMW X5 was at the end of the drive, pointed directly at the new closed gate. She was going to ram it. The sheer idiotic desperation of the act was stunning. "Don't do it, you fool!" I yelled, but she either didn't hear me or didn't care. The engine screamed, and the car launched forward. It covered the 50 yards to the gate in a blur of white. And then there was a sound I will never forget. Not the crash I expected, but a deep, resonant thump. A sound of 2 tons of German engineering meeting 10 tons of American steel and concrete. The BMW didn't smash through the gate. It didn't even dent it. The front of the car simply crumpled like a soda can. The hood buckled, the engine block was probably shoved halfway into the dashboard, and all 4 tires seemed to splay outwards. The car came to an immediate, dead stop, steam and smoke pouring from under the crushed hood. The airbag had deployed, pinning a stunned Cynthia to her seat. I walked slowly down the drive, my phone in my hand, already recording. The gate was pristine. There was a small scuff mark on the black paint where her bumper had hit, but that was it. Big Mike had not been exaggerating. Her car was an absolute wreck. The front end was completely destroyed. I walked up to her window. She was dazed, a trickle of blood coming from her nose where her sunglasses had been smashed into her face. She stared at the unyielding steel gate in front of her as if she couldn't comprehend it. "You see," I said, my voice calm as I filmed her shocked face and the wreckage of her car. "I told you it was a private drive." I stopped recording, put my phone in my pocket, and called the sheriff. "Martha, it's Jake McCoy." "Yeah, I'm fine. But you need to send a deputy and a tow truck out to my place. Mrs. Bradshaw has had a little accident. Tried to drive through my new gate. Yeah, the car's totaled. No, the gate's fine." The wall was up. The trap was sprung. Her desperation had led her to destroy her own vehicle in a fit of impotent rage. And I had it all on video. The final act was set for the town hall meeting on Tuesday. She didn't know it yet, but her open house was already a funeral for her career. The weekend of her open house was, by all accounts, a disaster for her. People showed up expecting to see the scenic ranch road, and instead were greeted by the sight of my monolithic concrete wall. The story of her ramming the gate and totaling her BMW had already spread through the county like wildfire, thanks to the tow truck driver and the deputy who responded. Instead of looking like a victim, she looked unhinged. I spent that weekend preparing for the final showdown. The town council had a public meeting scheduled for Tuesday night. The agenda included a discussion on zoning changes for a new commercial strip, which meant the room would be packed with concerned citizens, business owners, and, most importantly, the local media. Tom, my lawyer, had advised me that this was the perfect venue. It was a public forum. Speaking during the open comment period was my right. I put together my ammunition. I had a folder for every person I thought might be there, for the reporters, for the council members, and especially for the half-dozen families I'd identified from my trail cam videos as her prospective buyers. Each folder contained the same thing: a copy of my deed, a copy of the 1985 survey, a copy of her development's plat map with the fraudulent proposed easement highlighted, a printed high-resolution still from the video of her ramming my gate, and a QR code that linked to a private webpage where I had uploaded all 47 videos of her and her realtors trespassing and committing fraud. When Tuesday night came, I walked into the town hall feeling calmer than I had in months. Sarah was with me, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm. The room was buzzing. I saw Cynthia Bradshaw sitting in the front row with her lawyer. She looked haggard. She was wearing too much makeup to cover the bruise on her face from the airbag, and she shot me a look of pure venom as I walked past. She thought she was there to publicly decry my illegal wall. She had no idea she was the main event. I saw at least 3 couples in the audience that I recognized from my videos. Perfect. They were front and center for the show. I sat through the tedious zoning discussion, my folder resting on my lap. Finally, the mayor opened the floor for public comments. Cynthia's hand shot up first. She walked to the podium, arranged her notes, and began her speech. It was a masterclass in victimhood. She spoke of community, of safety, of the unneighborly and aggressive actions of an old guard landowner who refused to accommodate progress. She painted me as a villain, the wall as a monument to my spite. "This illegal structure is a danger to the residents of Sterling Creek," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "It blocks critical emergency access that was promised to them, promised to us when the land was zoned. She was lying again, right to the face of the town council. When she finished, there was a smattering of polite applause from the people she'd brought with her. The mayor looked at me. "Mr. McCoy, would you care to respond?" "I would," I said calmly. I walked to the podium, placing my folder on the lectern. I didn't look at Cynthia. I looked at the council, at the reporters, and at the family she had duped. "My name is Jake McCoy," I began. "My family has owned the Broken Spur Ranch, all 50 acres of it, since 1940. Mrs. Bradshaw speaks of being a good neighbor. Since she began her development, I have been subjected to reckless driving on my private property that endangered my livestock, the destruction of my property, and a campaign of harassment that included false and malicious reports to the Sheriff's Department, the EPA, and the Health Department, all of which were proven to be baseless." A murmur went through the room. Cynthia's face was beginning to tighten. "Mrs. Bradshaw speaks of a critical emergency access easement. I'd like to make something perfectly clear. No such easement exists. It has never existed." I held up a copy of my deed and survey. "This is the deed to my land, filed with this county. This is the official survey. As you can see, the driveway in question is designated legally as private access. It belongs to me and me alone." I then held up the plat map for her development. "This is the map for Sterling Creek Estates. You'll note the dotted line she calls an easement is labeled proposed. It is a fiction she created to sell houses, a lie she put in her marketing materials." I turned and looked directly at the couples in the audience. "To the families who were promised a private scenic ranch road, I am truly sorry you were deceived. You were sold an amenity that the seller, Mrs. Bradshaw, never owned and had no right to offer. She committed fraud at your expense." The room was silent now. You could hear a pin drop. Cynthia was on her feet. "This is slander. He is lying." "Am I?" I said, my voice ringing through the hall. "Mrs. Bradshaw claims my wall is a danger. The only danger on that road has been her. Last Friday, in a fit of rage, she deliberately drove her car at high speed into my new gate." I held up the photo of her wrecked BMW. Gasps rippled through the audience. Luckily, the gate was built to withstand such threats, and it was not damaged. Her car, however, was. Then came the finale. "For anyone who doubts a word I've said," I announced, "I have compiled all the evidence. In the back of the room, my wife is handing out folders. They contain copies of all the legal documents and a link to 47 separate, time-stamped videos showing Mrs. Bradshaw and her agents repeatedly trespassing on my land and using it to fraudulently market their properties." As Sarah started handing out the folders, chaos erupted. The reporters scrambled to get one. The families she'd lied to snatched them up, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. Cynthia's lawyer was trying to restrain her, but she was livid, screaming about lawsuits and lies. And that's when the 2 sheriff's deputies, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, began to walk forward. They had been alerted by Tom and had a copy of my evidence packet already. They had seen the videos. They had the sworn affidavits from the duped buyers that Tom had collected. They walked right up to the podium, past me, and stopped in front of a sputtering Cynthia Bradshaw. "Cynthia Bradshaw," the lead deputy said, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the noise. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of felony fraud and criminal trespassing." The handcuffs clicked. The cameras flashed. The entire room erupted. Her lawyer's jaw was on the floor. The families she had defrauded were pointing at her, shouting, and I just stood there, leaning against the podium, a small, quiet smile on my face. It was all over. She was led out of the town hall in handcuffs, her face a mask of disbelief and ruin, captured by every news camera in the county. The story was the lead on the 11 o'clock news, not as a neighbor dispute, but as the arrest of a fraudulent developer. The aftermath was swift and total. Faced with multiple lawsuits from the buyers she had defrauded, and with the evidence against her being undeniable, Cynthia's entire financial house of cards collapsed. Her lender called in her loans. The Sterling Creek Estates project went into receivership. She declared bankruptcy a month later. At her trial, she pled guilty to a lesser charge to avoid a long prison sentence, but she received a hefty fine, probation, and a felony conviction that would prevent her from ever holding a real estate license again. She lost everything. And me? My life went back to normal. The quiet I had spent $52,000 to reclaim was worth every penny. The wall stands to this day, a big, ugly, beautiful monument to property rights and the consequences of messing with a man's land. The new gate stays closed, and the only traffic on my driveway is my own truck and the occasional hay delivery. The deer have started coming back to the woods, and the loudest sound I hear most days is the lowing of my cattle in the pasture. Daisy had her calf, a strong and healthy bull, and life on the Broken Spur Ranch is peaceful again. They say good fences make good neighbors, but sometimes you need a 12-foot concrete wall to make a felon. If you enjoyed this pro-revenge and seeing an entitled HOA tyrant get a dose of concrete justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the ranch. Share this with anyone who's ever had to deal with a neighbor from hell, and let me know in the comments, what's the craziest thing an entitled neighbor has ever tried to pull on you?